All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for another video related to understanding and making connections with trig values. Okay, so at this point in our chapter and our understanding of trig, we've given you an angle and asked you to find specific values in trig values. We've given you a trig value and said, find me the angle, so basically work backwards. But now, what we're going to do is we're going to give you one trig function value, and we're going to use that to find something else. So, what do I mean by this? Well, take a look at example number 1. Suppose I tell you that the sine of theta equals a half. Okay, so what do you know about theta? Well, you know that theta has to land in quadrant 1 or quadrant 2 because the 1/2 is positive, okay? You also know that it can only be with a specific family because in terms of our x and our y values, there's only one family that has a y value of 1/2, right? So we're talking about the family of either pi over 6 or 30 degrees, depending on whether we're in radians or degrees. The question is, if you know all of that, then can you fill in this blank? Would you know the cosine? I would like to hope that you're sitting there listening to me saying, yes, Mrs. Fry, I have to know, because you know what number goes there. If the y value is 1/2, then you know that the cosine of that angle has to be the square root of 3 over 2. Now, the tricky part is you don't know for sure, is it positive or is it negative root 3 over 2? That's going to depend on whether that angle actually landed in quadrant 1 or quadrant 2, right? And then what about the tangent? Well, you know that the tangent is a ratio of those two values, so you know that the tangent of theta is likely going to be the square root of 3 over 3, or the square root of 3 over 3, but negative. Again, you're not sure because you don't know, is cosine positive, is cosine negative? So you can narrow it down to two choices. You just need to know what quadrant this lands in to finish answering this question. So what we're going to do in these problems is we're going to give you that kind of information, right? We're going to tell you a specific trig value. So sine of theta equals square root of 2 over 2. And then we're going to give you some extra information. This is to help narrow things to one quadrant, okay? Not the first quadrant, just a quadrant, okay? So a couple of things to remember. We've got our all-star trig class, all right, to help us with our pluses and minuses. And just remember, we've got 3 families. And for this, I'm going to say that we're going to deal with all of our families in radians. Not that it really matters because I'm not going to ask you for an angle, but just to help you think about it, we're going to think about it in radians. Okay, so ultimate goal is to answer this question. What is the secant of this angle, and what is the tangent of this angle? We're going to start with the sine of theta being the square root of 2 over 2. So if I know this, that the sine of theta is root 2 over 2, then I know that this angle, because that's positive, I know my angle either lands in quadrant 1 or quadrant 2. So then I have this additional piece of information here. I know the cotangent of theta is less than 0. This is code for cotangent of theta is, now before I tell you the answer, if the cotangent is less than 0, it's smaller than 0 on a number line, it has to be a negative number, all right? And so the question is, where can the cotangent be negative? Cotangent is negative the same place as tangent, okay? So that is negative. So if tangent's positive here, it's negative in the first. I'm just going to put a little c there. I'm sorry. Cotangent and tangent are related. Tangent's positive in the third quadrant. So the other two quadrants are where tangent's negative. So that means cotangent's negative there also. Moral of the story, we're looking at quadrants 2 or 4. So where's the overlap? quadrant 2, okay? So what does that mean? It means we have an angle in quadrant 2, and the ordered pair has to be negative root 2 comma 2 and positive root 2 over 2. And we're going to use this information to answer these two questions. Okay, so the tangent, that's pretty quick and easy. That's negative 1. And then the secant is going to be the reciprocal of the cosine value. So I look at this cosine value. The reciprocal of that is negative root 2. All right, and if you're like, Mrs. Fry, how did you do that so fast? Well, just take negative root 2 over 2, flip it over, multiply it by the square root of 2 so that you rationalize it, and you get negative 2 root 2 over 2. And the 2's, they cancel. So negative root 2. All right, I'm going to talk you through one more before I give you some time to practice. Okay, so again, we're given this piece of information in the middle. Okay, and we're told some additional information, and we are looking for the cosecant of theta and the cotangent of theta. All right, okay. So cosine of theta is negative 1/2. All right, I know that that means cosine must land in the second or the third quadrants. Here, I'll just write that down. Quadrant 2 or quadrant 3. And then the sine of theta being negative. Okay, less than 0. So that's code for sine being negative, which would put us in quadrants 3 or quadrants 4. So that's this guy and this guy. So where's the overlap? Quadrant 3. Okay, so if this angle lands in quadrant 3, that means it has an x value of negative 1/2 and a y value that's also negative. So that's got to be negative root 3 over 2, because that's what goes with the 1/2. So then I use this information to answer these two questions. Okay, so the cosecant is going to be the reciprocal of my sine value. So that's this guy right here, 1 over y. So that is going to be negative 2 root 3 over 3. All right. And then the cotangent is x divided by y. So that's going to be positive, and it's going to be square root of 3 over 3. All right? So now I want you to take a minute, pause, and see if you can figure out the two things you need, sine and cotangent, based on secant of theta being 2 and tangent of theta being greater than 0 for this next problem. And when you unpause, you should see your answers. All right, ladies and gents, so based on the information given, we had a secant value, so a reciprocal cosine value, that was 2. Since it's positive, we know that lands in quadrants 1 or 2. Then we had a tangent value that was greater than 0. That would mean it's positive, and tangent's positive in quadrants 1 or 3. So where was the overlap? Quadrant 1. So we take secant, and we take the reciprocal of that to get our cosine value, right? And then if our cosine is 1/2, we know that our sine must be root 3 over 2. So we get an answer to what the sine of theta is. And then we take the x value divided by the y value in order to find our cotangent. Now, the big thing here is that we are taking all of our information, our ordered pairs and our families, our understanding of where different functions are positive and negative, along with the various definitions of the 6 trig functions in order to answer all of these questions, okay? So I want you to keep moving forward and keep in mind that this can be applied even if your angle doesn't land on the unit circle. So I'm going to do example 4 for you, and then you're going to try the next couple of examples on your own. So the sine of theta equals 3/5. So we're going to go back to our idea that that's our x over our r, right? Our opposite over our hypotenuse. So this says that this lands in quadrant 2. So I'm going to draw myself a right triangle. Doesn't have to be a very good right triangle, but I'm going to draw myself a right triangle that has an opposite and a radius of 3/5. Now this last guy right here, this last side, I would use Pythagorean theorem to figure out, or I would remember my triples, and I would figure out that this is a 3/4 4, 5 triangle. And then since I had to go left of the origin and I'm in the second quadrant, I would know that that had to be a negative 4 to complete my side lengths. And then I would use those side lengths to answer these 6 questions. So one of these I already knew. So technically, without drawing the triangle, I could have figured out that the cosecant was 5/3. Okay? But then the cosine, I need my triangle for. So I look at that, and that'd be negative 4/5, which means my secant would be 5 over negative 4. And then my tangent would be my y divided by my x, so that's negative 3/4. So my cotangent would be negative 4/3. So use the triangle to answer all 5 of those questions, really. All right, and just remember that the original definition for sine was x divided by r. Cosine, I'm sorry, and I wrote that wrong before then, and you guys aren't here live to remind me that I did that, so y divided by r. Cosine of theta is x over r. And tangent, as always, is y divided by x. We just use r equals 1 on the unit circle, and that's why we don't have to do x over r or y over r all the time. Okay, so I'd like you guys to try example number 6, okay? Actually, try number 5 first. All right, off you go. All right, folks, couple of things to notice here in problem number 5. First off, if you notice, we gave you the cosine of theta equals negative 2/3, and you had to make a choice on which value was negative. You should make the x value negative because the radius of a circle cannot be negative. That distance can't be negative. It's always positive. So the second thing you should notice is when you go to make your triangle, please make sure you're always making it so that it references the x-axis. All right, make sure you're making it with the x-axis as your x value. All right, third thing is that when you go to calculate your y value, you're going to get the absolute value of it, not noting where it is in the coordinates. And so since it's in quadrant 3, that coordinate value should be negative square root of 5 after the Pythagorean theorem. So you have to include that. The best way to just double check that is when you go to write your sine or your cosine, remember that if you're in quadrant 3, your cosine should be negative. I'm sorry, your sine should be negative and your cosine should be negative. And your tangent should be positive based off of what you wrote. So if that didn't match up, you would just need to change your signs to fix that. Okay, so I got the square root of 5 for the y distance in my little triangle. So I got these 6 values for my sine, cosine, tangent, cosecant, secant, and cotangent based off of that triangle. All right, so I think if you feel like you need, another practice problem, I think there's 2 more in here, problem 6 and 7, that you could certainly try. You don't have to. What I'm going to tell you is just make sure you remember to pay attention to all the details, understand these less than, greater than symbols to help you figure out your quadrants. And with that, thanks so much for listening. We'll see you back here real soon, folks. Bye.